Is that actually an age requirement by the Bible or as Christians to get married? No. Actually, a number of limitations, should I say limitations or requirements or specifications, we see a number of specifications in scripture for marriage, but there's none exactly that has to do with, well, okay, let me rephrase that. A number of them have to do with age, but there's none that specifically says this is the age cutoff mark for marriage. This is the age cutoff to get married. We don't see anything like that. Right. The reason why that's why I even said that there are some that has to do with age, because there is one requirement that we see from the Old Testament even into the New, and I'll show some of the scriptures now that say that whoever is getting married has to be grown. So in some sense, there has to be some sense maturity. They have to be physically mature, or let me just say maturity, because maturity can change over. Well, I would explain. Let me just go into it. Um, Maturity can change over culture and over time, right? But then culture defines what maturity means. But then there's a sense of maturity that we've seen that scripture prescribes. Are we getting what I'm saying? There's a sense of maturity that we see that scripture prescribes. And maturity, so we can we can check Old Testament. There's an account in Ruth, that small book that many people have not read ever in their lives. I'm not shading you, but do better than read it. It's in the Bible, so read it. Okay, Ruth chapter 1. This was when um excuse me, sorry, this was when this woman Naomi, right, lost her husband and her children. And then her daughter-in-law, or her former daughter-in-law, because the children they were married to are now dead. So they are not, in a sense, they are not married to them anymore. Because marriage is to dead those parts in it. So they were like, oh, we will follow you. And Naomi was like, go back. So verse 12, Ruth chapter 1, he said, turn back to Naomi speaking to Ruth and the other lady. Turn back, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I should say I have hope to have a husband, if I should have an husband tonight and should bear sons, are you going to wait for them till they are grown? So now, Naomi is saying that, see, yes, I know you people want to follow me, but then I don't have any husband, I don't have any son that to serve as husband for you to marry. And even if I have to give birth this night, it's not that you would marry them now, right? Even if I was to give birth to them this night, it's not like you people will marry them now. So see, there's an expectation. There's almost as if there was this thing being spoken of, right, in scripture, that marriage, as they saw in the culture in the Old Testament, and we'll look at the New Testament too, there has to be a level of maturity. So if I born them today, you cannot marry them today because they have not grown. So Naomi was implicitly saying that they have to mature before they can even serve as your husband. So because you cannot wait that long, just go. Of course, Ruth did not listen, but that's not the point of this question. We can go now for First Corinthians. This was Apostle Paul writing to the Corinthian church. First Corinthians chapter 7. And backstory, he was writing to them concerning marriage. And although we know that Apostle Paul, we don't have any record of him getting married, and but then he was telling them that, see, it's not a sin to get married. If so, this was what he was talking about in chapter 7, this verse. This is not a sin for people to get married. If you have a daughter or you have somebody we'll just go through the text. First Corinthians 7:36. It says, but if a man thinks he's behaving improperly towards his virgin, so this is usually interpreted as either daughter or just somebody who is a virgin that is of age, is mature. And the next phrase shows us that, so the next clause rather, if she is past the flower of her youth, I'm reading NKJV. Flower of her youth here means or denotes maturity. If she's mature enough to get married, let them marry. All right, let them marry. So there is no, we don't see any age restriction in scripture for marriage, but there is a sense that we've seen continuously that anybody who has to get married who is to get married rather has to be mature. And at that time, the consensus of maturity is physical maturity, right? And I'll speak on that. I'll speak on what I wanted to say, but let me just go. There's something I wanted to say, but I think I'll just mention it another time or later. But then the concept of maturity or conceptual maturity has now changed over time, because the concept of maturity then, the maturity was maybe I'll just say now, was based on how physically developed the flower of our youth, how physically developed somebody is many times, as we see in scripture, many times. So if a man or a boy or a girl, a male or female, appear matured enough to come together and have children, they are considered mature. All right. And that's the context of maturity, because that's the context of maturity that we see in those times. But then culture, and time has changed what we esteem as maturity, because coming to today's context now, the context of today says that when we come to maturity and things that pertain to marriage, there are people who are underage, even if they can give birth already, because a lady of 16-year-old can get pregnant and give birth at 16 years. But then in today's context, we don't see 16-year-olds as mature enough to get married. Why? Because there's a context of being stable to even sustain a family. Right. So the economic development or the economic changes and cultural changes over time has set what we term maturity today. Right. In terms of sustenance, because we can't really say a 17, 18-year-old is mature enough to sustain a home in terms of finances, in terms of mental maturity. But then there seems to be a sense of maturity that is instilled early because of the society, because of the social and economic makeup of the society at that time, right? A 17-year-old has been working already for years, so has some economic status. So my point is, things have changed over time. So what we define as maturity, right, is cultural, and culture rather has evolved, and of course is different from place to place. But then the baseline is physical maturity, right? It's not giving a 9-year-old or a 6-year-old. I'll say something, but this is not the place. So it is not tonight. Let me just leave it. Say Mohammed. Anyway. In context of maturity, the baseline, at least the least it has to be, is physical maturity at the very least. Because while there is no age limit for marriage, scripture, right? While there's no age limit for marriage, we know it's morally wrong to be a pedophile, right? Because that's assaulting someone who doesn't have a choice in old enough to make that, even the law says that. Anyway, so as I was saying, sexuality and marriage is maturity is highly cultural. People are not generally expected to be self-sufficient until their 20s, as I've said. I'm reading my notes now. But these are the things I've said already. People are not expected to be self-sufficient until their 20s in the Western cultures. But for most of human history, people were expected to grow up sooner. So teenagers were actually had the expectation of self-sufficiency, as I said. So the age for getting married back then was normally younger. That's why, so that's why we see that, there's like this idea that some of the disciples, if not most of them, or disciples of Jesus are actually teenagers, but some of them were married, like Peter. So the age for them was to marry was quite young because sustenance expectation then and now is different. But then the bottom line, as I said, is the person must be fully grown physically and mature enough for sexuality and childbearing and mentally capable as well. But otherwise, the Bible does not prescribe that, oh, you must be 22, 25, 31 to get married. You don't see anything, but the baseline is the person has to be physically mature. The person has to be physically mature.